Namaste. Welcome back to Scientific Connections Project Geeta. And I hope you and your family are safe at this time of coronavirus. So let's get right to it. I'll begin with a brief review of what we did last week. Last week, we focused on one verse from chapter 6. It was about being a perfect yogi. The verse said, with the mind harmonized by yoga, he sees the self abiding in all beings and all beings in the self. And he sees the same everywhere. And we commented last week saying that if you understand the meaning of this thing, empathy and compassion would be a natural consequence of that. And we also mentioned that these two mental states, in other words, empathy, being empathetic and compassionate, is essential for well-being. And I told you about Professor Davidson's work. Professor Davidson from University of Wisconsin. He had some neuroscience work and experimental science, and he talks about 4 different constituents of well-being, namely resilience, positive outlook, attention, and generosity. I want to draw your attention to 2 other verses in chapter 6, just for the sake of completeness. Verse 31 says, he who being established in unity worships me, who dwells in all beings, that yogi abides in me, whatever be his mode of living. So the last portion of it, whatever his mode of living, you don't have to be a monk. You can continue to live your life. You may be a father, you could be a husband, you could be a wife, you could be a daughter, a sister. You don't have to abandon any of that stuff. You can still identify the true essence of you as the all-pervading self. With that, compassion and empathy come automatically. And then the next verse says, he who through the likeness or sameness of the self sees equality everywhere, be it pleasure or pain, he is regarded as the highest yogi. I think that meaning is self-evident. But what's really important for us is that we want to be able to have a stable mind and then reduce anxiety and stress. I can emphatically say that if you understand the meaning and the implication of these verses and meditate upon them, remember 2 weeks ago we talked about how to meditate, again from chapter 6. So if you haven't watched that video, go back and watch that and practice it. All this stuff is really good, but if you don't practice this yoga and meditation, it's not going to be very useful. Remember last week I said, Professor Davidson said, being compassionate or being empathetic, that's all a skill. You can learn it. You don't have to be born with that. Okay? So I want to talk today more about stress and immunity. I think immunity, that subject matter, is extremely important in this period of COVID-19. Now, is there a connection between stress and immunity? The answer is a resounding yes. Most health experts agree, and they say yes, there's a strong connection. I'll give you some references as usual at the end. But this diagram I took from this paper is coming from Simply Psychology. So if you look at it, if you're stressed, I'm talking about distress, not moderate stress or anything, acute stress. What happens is it increases heart rate and blood pressure. That definitely will um, affect your cardiovascular system. Um, and because high stress can produce cortisol, it's actually it's a steroid, right? Then that production of that steroid suppresses the immune system as well, and it can have a disruptive, very um, very serious effect on the digestive system as well. Um, I don't want to go into too many details of the biology of it, but I want to point out two things. Uh, the production of adrenaline uh, caused by the increased stress, this can cause, in turn, ulcers. That's an established fact. And also, cortisol, um, increased production of cortisol lowers the number of lymphocytes. What are lymphocytes? Lymphocytes are cells that can fight antigens. So it's no wonder, it's not a coincidence that when you're stressed for a prolonged time, a period of time, you're more susceptible for colds and flus and other infections, because it interferes, these hormones interfere with the body's mechanism, natural mechanism of fighting diseases. Now, you might wonder, well, so there's no stress. I mean, how can you live that? You need some stress. A little bit of stress is actually good. That actually enables you to do certain things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. So I took this chart from a scientific study, the paper that I mentioned before. Again, I'll give you the references at the end. This is coming from reference number 1. So if you look at it, this is the result of scientific study of people. The immune functioning, it actually goes up a little bit with a moderate amount of stress. But what should be avoided is prolonged stress, or chronic stress. Another language people use is that. That can be detrimental to your health. So remember this this curve. So what do I mean by a little bit of stress is good? I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, when I discuss sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to mention one more thing. It's just the stress hormones affect the immune system biologically, yes. But there's also another factor. When you're stressed, people sometimes start smoking or take refuge in drinking and things like that. So stress can tempt people to indulge in really bad behavior, addictive behavior. And those things, habits, are usually bad. Drinking too much alcohol or smoking, that can be really, really bad for your health. So that's an indirect consequence of stress. So let me tell you a little bit about this. Is basically the biology of the human body. There's a thing called sympathetic nervous system, and then a parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for intense activity when you actually need to do intense activity. For example, let's say you're alone taking a walk, someone came to attack you. So you need to have that extra energy and certain capabilities to either run away or fight. Okay, so that's very important to have that. So temporarily, some of the things are shut off. The digestive system is shut off. The heart rate is raised, and you take more oxygen, and so on. However, what we are warned against is prolonged state of being under stress. Then what happens is these resources that the body has are compromised. Okay, it's almost like driving a car in first or second gear for a long time. It's clear that your automobile, your vehicle, needs those gears, the lower gear, first and second gears, to go uphill, right? But if you drive that all the time, it really drains the resources of the engine. It can damage your engine. But what you need is the conscious effort on your part to bring your body into the control of the PNS, like parasympathetic nervous system. That system relaxes the body and inhibits or slows down these many high energy functions, right? So the code for that is rest and digest. Now, meditation does exactly that. It's a conscious effort of the individual to relax and get from the sympathetic nervous system to parasympathetic nervous system. In other words, you don't allow your amygdala in your brain to hijack a situation. A lot of times, the perceived threat is not as grave as you think it is. It could be as simple as, hey, my friend didn't say hello to me, or he mocked me or laughed at me or something like that. That can instill some kind of anxiety and stress and unpleasant feeling. But if you constantly meditate and ponder the meanings of the verses that I told you about, those occurrences can be reduced to a great deal. Okay, so I think that's all I have for today. Here are some references. The reference number 2, it's a classic paper that many people quote. This is probably one of the earliest studies of the effect of stress on human immunity, okay? Human body's immunity, immune system, rather. Take a look and then read it. And reference number 3 is a very short video. It's actually, the presenter is very good. He talks about all the stuff that I just mentioned in a very clear language. So please read and watch and learn more. That's one advice that I keep giving everyone who watches these videos of Scientific Connections. There's a lot of literature out there on the internet and other places. There are so many books. I believe there's a book published by a psychologist or a doctor, I believe a medical professional, about stress and human immune system. So, Google it and find out. So again, thanks for watching. Be safe, be healthy. Okay, see you next time.